Laughter exploded through the wedding crowd when my mother-in-law grabbed my bouquet and threw it straight into the koi pond. She looked at me and smiled and said I was a nobody. She said I would never belong in her family. Everyone around her laughed with her. My new husband just looked down at his shoes and said nothing. But 9 minutes later, 6 black cars rolled through the front gates of that estate. A man stepped out wearing a uniform covered in gold buttons. He walked past all the rich guests without even looking at them. He got down on his knees in the mud in his clean uniform, and he began searching the pond with his bare hands. He was not looking for flowers. He was looking for something small and gold that had fallen into the water with the bouquet. That small gold thing was not a wedding decoration. It was a crown, and it belonged to me. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We would love to hear from you, and please hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Nora Whitfield, and for most of my life, I believed I came from nothing and I would always be nothing. I grew up in the foster system. I was moved from house to house so many times that I stopped unpacking my bags all the way. I learned early that things could be taken from me at any moment, so I stopped getting attached to things. But when I was 11 years old, everything changed. A quiet man named Walter Hayes became my foster father, and later my real father in every way that mattered. Walter was not rich. He worked as a mechanic. He fixed cars during the day and read me stories at night. He never once made me feel like a burden. He made me feel like his daughter. Walter used to say something to me all the time. He would say, "Nora, you did not come from nothing. You came from somewhere. One day you will understand where." I never understood what he meant. I thought he was just trying to make a sad little girl feel special. I grew up, I went to nursing school, and I became a hospice nurse. I spent my days sitting with people in the final moments of their lives, holding their hands, listening to their last words. It taught me that money does not matter when your time is almost over. Only love matters. Only kindness matters. 6 months before my wedding, Walter got very sick. I sat by his bed every single night after my shifts at the hospital. On his last night, he pulled a small velvet box from under his pillow. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely open it. Inside was a strange old pin, shaped like a tiny crown, made of heavy gold with a small red stone in the center. He told me it was the only thing he had when he found me. He said someone had left it with me a long, long time ago. He told me to keep it safe and to never sell it, no matter how hard life got. Then he told me he loved me, and he closed his eyes, and he never opened them again. I pinned that little gold crown inside my wedding bouquet, hidden between the flowers, so that Walter could still be with me on my wedding day, even though he could not walk me down the aisle. I did not know that small piece of gold would change my entire life in a matter of hours. I met my husband, Ethan Caldwell, at the hospital where I worked. His grandmother was dying, and I was her nurse. Ethan came every single day to sit with her, even after long days at his family's shipping company. I liked that about him. He was gentle in a way that rich men in movies never are. We fell in love slowly, over quiet conversations in hospital hallways. I did not know then that his family was one of the wealthiest shipping families on the East Coast. I did not know that his mother, Diane Caldwell, would spend the next 3 years trying to destroy me. The first time I met Diane, she looked me up and down like she was checking the price tag on something cheap. She asked me what my family did for work. I told her I did not have a family, that I grew up in foster care. She smiled a thin smile and said, "Well, that explains a lot, dear." I did not understand what she meant at the time. I understand now. She meant that in her eyes I would never be good enough because I did not come from money, because I did not come from a name people recognized. Diane had a daughter too, Ethan's sister, named Priya Caldwell Voss. Priya was worse than her mother in almost every way. She had a way of smiling at you while saying the cruelest things, so that if you got upset, she could act shocked and say she was only joking. Priya once told me at a family dinner that Ethan could have married anyone, a doctor, a lawyer, someone with a real family behind her, and instead he chose a girl who grew up bouncing between strangers' houses. She said it while smiling and holding a glass of wine, like she was talking about the weather. For 3 years, I tried to win them over. I brought Diane flowers on her birthday. She threw them away in front of me and said she was allergic. I offered to help plan family events. Priya told me my taste was, in her words, very budget. I stayed quiet. I stayed kind. I told myself that if I just gave it enough time, they would see who I really was. Walter used to tell me that kindness is never wasted, even when it feels like it disappears into nothing. I held on to that. I did not know that the cruelest night of my life was still ahead of me. Part 3, the engagement when Ethan proposed. He did it quietly, in the same hospital garden where his grandmother used to sit. He said he did not care what his mother thought. He said he loved me for exactly who I was. I believed him completely. I said yes with tears running down my face. For one night, I felt like nothing in the world could touch me. I should have known that feeling would not last long around people like Diane and Priya. When we told Ethan's family, Diane did not even pretend to be happy. She set down her fork, looked at her son, and said, "Ethan, you cannot be serious." Priya laughed out loud, actually laughed, and said, "Oh my gosh, is this a joke?" Ethan tried to defend me, but his voice was not as strong as I needed it to be in that moment. He told them to give me a chance. Diane looked at me across the table and said something I will never forget. She said, "You can put a used car in a nice garage, but it is still a used car underneath." I went home that night and cried into my pillow so no one would hear me, but I did not call off the wedding. I loved Ethan, and somewhere deep inside me, I still believed that love could fix anything. I was wrong about that. Love cannot fix cruelty. Only the truth can do that, and the truth was already on its way to me, even though I did not know it yet. The months before the wedding were some of the hardest of my life. Diane insisted on controlling every single detail, from the flowers to the guest list to my own wedding dress. When I picked out a simple, elegant gown, Diane looked at it and said it looked like something from a discount rack. She picked a different dress for me instead, one that was tighter and shinier than anything I would have chosen for myself, just so I would look, in her words, less plain next to the other women at the wedding. Priya was chosen as my maid of honor, not because she wanted the role out of love, but because Diane insisted it would look strange if she was not included. Priya used every single wedding planning meeting as a chance to remind me how little I belonged. She rolled her eyes when I talked about Walter. She once said, out loud, in front of the wedding planner, that it was a shame I did not have a real father to walk me down the aisle. I had to leave the room to keep from crying in front of everyone. Two of the other bridesmaids, Brooke Sinclair and Tessa Marlowe, were old friends of Priya's from her private school days. They followed Priya's lead in everything. If Priya laughed at me, they laughed. If Priya ignored me, they ignored me. I felt like an outsider at my own wedding planning, surrounded by women who had already decided, long before they met me, that I did not deserve to be there. The worst moment came 2 weeks before the wedding. The bridesmaids planned a bachelorette weekend and did not invite me. I found out only because I saw the photos online, all of them laughing on a boat somewhere warm, while I sat alone in my apartment. When I asked Priya about it later, she said, "Oh, we figured you would feel out of place." It was not cruelty by accident. It was cruelty on purpose, dressed up as concern. Through all of it, I kept that little gold crown pin close. I had it sewn carefully into a small pocket inside my wedding bag, planning to pin it into my bouquet on the morning of the wedding. It was the only piece of Walter I would have with me on the happiest day of my life, or so I hoped it would be. The morning of my wedding, I woke up with a strange, heavy feeling in my chest. I told myself it was just nerves. I got my hair and makeup done in a small room at the estate where the wedding was being held, a beautiful old property with tall stone walls and a large garden in the back, with a koi pond near the center of it, surrounded by white flowers. While I was getting ready, I pinned the little gold crown into the center of my bouquet, hidden carefully among the white roses. I looked at it for a long moment and whispered, "This one is for you, Walter." I felt closer to him in that moment than I had in months. I did not know that pin was about to change the entire course of my life within a matter of hours. Diane came into the room while I was getting ready, and instead of saying anything kind, she looked at my dress and said, "Well, it will have to do." Priya walked in behind her and said, "At least the lighting is good, so the photos might still look nice." I smiled through it because it was my wedding day, and I told myself that after today, none of it would matter anymore. I would finally be part of the family, and maybe, just maybe, things would get better. I had no idea that things were about to get so much worse before they got better. And I had no idea just how much better would eventually turn out to be. The ceremony itself went smoothly. Ethan cried when he saw me walking down the aisle, which made me cry too. For a few minutes, standing there with him, I forgot about Diane, I forgot about Priya, I forgot about every cruel word from the past 3 years. I only saw Ethan's face and felt his hand shaking slightly as he held mine. The reception was held outside, near that same koi pond, under strings of soft lights. Everything looked beautiful. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne. Guests laughed and danced. For a while, I let myself believe this really was the happiest day of my life. Then came the toasts. Diane stood up with a microphone in her hand, and the entire crowd went quiet to listen. She started off sounding sweet, talking about how much she loved her son, how proud she was of him. Then her voice changed. She looked directly at me and said, "And to my new daughter-in-law, Nora, I know some people will say I have been hard on you these past few years, but I only wanted to protect my son from making a mistake he could not undo." She paused, smiled at the crowd, and added, "Some people are simply born into families, and some people just marry their way in, hopping no one notices the difference." A few guests laughed nervously. Priya laughed loudly, without any shame at all. I felt my face go hot with embarrassment in front of 200 people. Ethan opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, Diane walked over, picked up my bouquet from the table beside me, and said, "Let us be honest, this bouquet probably cost more than her entire childhood ever did." Then, in front of everyone, she threw it as hard as she could into the koi pond. The crowd gasped. Then some of them actually laughed, thinking it was some strange joke. My bouquet, with Walter's crown pin hidden inside it, sank slowly into the muddy water. I stood there frozen, feeling like the entire world had gone silent around me. That was the moment my whole life, without me even knowing it yet, was about to turn completely upside down. Before we continue, if this story is already breaking your heart, please hit that like button. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is the perfect time, because what happens next changes absolutely everything. I did not move. I could not move. I just stared at the pond where my father's last gift to me had just disappeared under the water. Ethan finally found his voice and told his mother that what she did was cruel and unacceptable, but Diane waved her hand like she was swatting away a fly. Priya smirked and said, "Oh, come on, it is just a bouquet. We can buy her a new one." That is when we heard it. A low, steady sound of engines coming up the long driveway toward the estate. At first, people barely noticed, thinking it might be more guests arriving late. But then the sound grew louder, more engines than any group of late guests could ever need. 6 black cars came through the front gates in a straight line, moving slowly, deliberately, like they had all the time in the world and nowhere else more important to be. The cars stopped in front of the reception area. Every single guest turned to look. Doors opened at the exact same moment, like it had been practiced 100 times before. Men in dark, sharp uniforms stepped out of the first few cars, standing perfectly still, forming a line. Then, from the middle car, a tall man stepped out wearing a formal military uniform covered in gold buttons and medals, with a deep red sash across his chest. Diane's smile disappeared from her face for the first time all evening. Guests whispered to each other, confused, wondering if this was some kind of surprise performance, or maybe a mistake, or maybe the wrong wedding entirely. The tall man in uniform did not look confused at all. He looked directly toward the koi pond, then he looked directly at me, and he said one single word. "Princess." The entire reception went completely silent. 200 people stood frozen, staring back and forth between me and the man in the uniform. I stood there in my wedding dress, completely confused, wondering if I had heard him wrong. The man walked forward, past Diane, past Priya, past Ethan, and stopped directly in front of me. He introduced himself as Commander Drayton, and he said he had been searching for me for nearly 20 years. He said the words slowly, like he wanted to make sure I understood every single one of them. He told me my birth name was not Nora Hayes. He told me my birth name was Princess Alara, heir to the small mountain kingdom of Lindmore, a place I had never even heard of before that moment. He said I had been hidden in America as a baby to protect me from people inside my own family who wanted to take the throne for themselves. He said the man who raised me, Walter Hayes, had unknowingly been protecting the most important secret in the entire kingdom, simply by loving me and keeping me safe. I could not speak. My mind could not accept what my ears were hearing. Then Commander Drayton looked past me, toward the koi pond, and he said, "Your Highness, I believe something very important of yours fell into that water tonight." Without waiting for permission, without caring even a little bit about his expensive uniform, He walked straight into the muddy pond and knelt down in the water, searching carefully with both hands. Guests gasped as they watched a decorated military commander crawling through mud on his knees in front of everyone, searching for something small enough to fit in the palm of his hand. Diane stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, her face pale as paper. Priya's smug smile had completely vanished, replaced by something that looked a lot like fear. After a few long, silent moments, Commander Drayton lifted his hand out of the water. In his palm sat the small gold pin, covered in mud, but still clearly shaped like a tiny crown, with the small red stone catching the light from the reception. He wiped it gently against his uniform sleeve, careful not to damage it. Then he walked back over to me and held it out on his open palm. He explained in front of everyone that this pin was not just a piece of jewelry. It was the Lindmore Royal Seal, an object that had been missing for over 2 decades, ever since I was smuggled out of the kingdom as an infant to protect me from danger. He said the seal could only be carried by a true blood member of the royal family, and its return, tonight, in this exact place, confirmed everything his search had already told him. I reached out with shaking hands and took the small gold crown from his palm. The moment I touched it, something inside me settled, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place after 26 years of feeling like I never quite fit anywhere. I thought about Walter, about his shaking hands on his last night, about him telling me I came from somewhere. He had known. He had always known there was more to my story, even if he never knew exactly what it was. Diane finally found her voice, though it came out shaky and small compared to how she usually spoke. She said, "This has to be some kind of mistake. She is nobody. She grew up in foster care." Commander Drayton turned to look at her, his expression calm but firm, and he said, "She is the last living heir to the throne of Lindmore. And based on everything my government has learned about how she has been treated inside this family, we have a great deal more to discuss with all of you." Chancellor Ashgrove, an older man who had arrived in one of the other black cars, stepped forward next. He explained the full story to me, gently in front of the stunned crowd, since he said I deserved to hear the truth immediately, not hidden away in private. He said that 26 years ago, a group of powerful nobles inside Lindmore attempted to remove my grandfather, the king, from power. In the chaos, my parents made the painful decision to send me far away, to protect me, believing it would only be for a short time until things settled down. But things did not settle down quickly. The nobles who caused the chaos took even greater control of the kingdom for years, and searching for a hidden infant princess proved far more difficult than anyone expected. My parents passed away several years later, still hoping I would one day be found and brought home safely. My grandfather, the old king, never gave up searching, even as his health began to fail with age. Just recently, the corrupt nobles who caused the original chaos were finally removed from power, and the kingdom began an urgent search to locate the missing heir before the king's health failed completely. That search led investigators to hospital records, foster care documents, and eventually to a small gold pin that had been reported once, years ago, by a mechanic named Walter Hayes, who quietly asked a jeweler what an old royal seal might be worth, only to be told to keep it hidden and safe instead of selling it. Hearing Walter's name spoken out loud, in front of all these strangers, in front of Diane and Priya, made tears fall freely down my face for the first time that night. Walter had protected me without ever fully understanding what he was protecting. He had given up nothing for money, even when he probably needed it. He had simply loved me, exactly the way a father should. As the truth settled over the crowd, Diane tried one more time to save face. She stepped toward me with a shaking smile and said, "Nora, sweetheart, we are still family. None of this needs to change anything between us." I looked at her for a long moment, thinking about 3 years of cruel comments, thrown away flowers, and a bouquet just pulled from muddy water. I said, quietly but clearly so everyone could hear, "You spent 3 years telling me I would never belong anywhere near your family. You were right. I do not belong in this family. I belong somewhere much bigger than this family ever was." Priya, still in shock, tried to laugh it off one more time, saying this all had to be some kind of elaborate joke or scam. Chancellor Ashgrove looked at her with a calm, serious expression and said that Lindmore investigators had also uncovered some very troubling financial records connected to the Caldwell Shipping Company during their search. including offshore accounts and questionable deals that American authorities would likely find extremely interesting very soon. Diane's face went completely white. Priya's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Ethan stood in the middle of all of it, looking lost, looking at me like he was seeing a stranger for the first time, even though I was still exactly the same woman he had fallen in love with in that hospital garden. He finally said my name, softly, and reached for my hand. I looked at him, at the man who had defended me sometimes but never quite enough, and I gently pulled my hand away. I told him that I needed him to have stood beside me every single time his mother tore me down, not just tonight, when the entire world was suddenly watching. Commander Drayton offered me his arm, and Chancellor Ashgrove explained that a private plane was already waiting at a nearby airfield, ready to take me home to Lindmore, to finally meet the grandfather who had spent 26 years searching for me. I looked around at the wedding I had planned for months, at guests who had laughed at my humiliation only minutes earlier, at Diane and Priya standing pale and silent near the muddy pond. I reached up and gently removed my wedding veil, letting it fall to the ground behind me. I did not need it anymore. I turned to Ethan one final time and said, "Goodbye, and thank you for the good moments, even though they were never quite enough." Then I took Commander Drayton's arm, and together we walked toward the line of black cars waiting at the gate, while 200 stunned wedding guests watched in complete silence behind us. As we drove away from the estate, I looked back one last time and saw Diane sink slowly down onto the muddy grass near the pond, her face buried in her hands. Priya stood frozen beside her, staring blankly at nothing. I felt something inside me that surprised me, a small, quiet flicker of satisfaction, but I pushed it down gently. I did not want to become someone who enjoyed other people's pain, even people who had caused me so much of my own. At the airfield, a private plane waited with its engines already running. As I stepped inside and sank into the soft leather seat, I finally let myself cry, not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming weight of everything that had happened in just a few short hours. Commander Drayton sat across from me, quiet and respectful, giving me space to process everything. As the plane lifted off into the darkening sky, I looked down at the little gold crown resting in my open palm. I thought about how, my entire life, I believed I was unwanted, extra, a burden that had been passed from house to house because no one truly wanted to keep me. Now I understood the truth was the exact opposite. I had been hidden because I was wanted so badly that people were willing to risk everything to keep me safe. Chancellor Ashgrove gently explained more of the details during the flight. He told me my grandfather, King Alaric, had waited 26 long years for this moment, refusing to name any other heir, holding on to hope even when his advisors told him to give up. He told me the kingdom of Lindmore had been informed just hours earlier that their lost princess had finally been found, and that crowds were already gathering near the palace gates to welcome me home. I looked out the window as the sun began to rise over unfamiliar mountains. The kingdom of Lindmore stretched out beneath me, covered in snow-capped peaks and green valleys I had never seen before. Yet somehow, deep down, they already felt like home. When the helicopter that met our plane finally landed near the palace, I could hear the crowd before I could even see them clearly. Thousands of people stood behind the palace gates, waving flags, crying, cheering, celebrating the return of a princess most of them had only ever heard about in old stories. The sound of their joy was unlike anything I had ever experienced in my entire life. I straightened my ruined wedding dress as best I could, and I pinned the small gold crown directly over my heart. I was no longer simply Nora Hayes, the foster kid who grew up feeling like a burden. I was no longer simply Nora Caldwell, the daughter-in-law who was never good enough for a family that never deserved her kindness in the first place. I was Princess Alara of Lindmore, home at last, exactly where I always belonged. Even during all those years, I did not know it. My grandfather, King Alaric, was waiting at the top of the palace steps, leaning on a cane, his eyes filled with tears as he watched me walk toward him. He did not say anything grand or formal. He simply opened his arms, and I ran into them like a little girl finally finding her way home after being lost for far too long. He whispered that he had never once given up hope, not for a single day in 26 years. 1 year later, life looks completely different than I ever imagined it would. I split my time between my new responsibilities in Lindmore and a small hospice center in America that I now fund and visit whenever I can. Because Walter taught me that no matter how much your life changes, you should never forget where kindness matters most. I placed a small plaque near the entrance with his name on it, so his memory lives on in the same kind of place where he would have wanted to spend his time. As for the Caldwell family, the financial investigation the Chancellor mentioned that night turned out to be very real. Deanne and Priya's family business collapsed under the weight of the fraud charges within just a few months, and their once untouchable social standing crumbled along with it. I did not celebrate their downfall. I simply moved forward, focused on the life I was finally building for myself, a life built on truth instead of cruelty. Ethan reached out to me several times after everything happened, asking for a chance to explain, to apologize, to somehow go back to who we used to be. I listened to him once, with kindness, because Walter also taught me that closing a door does not mean you have to slam it. But I told him clearly that I had found something in Lindmore I had been searching for my entire life without even realizing it, a place, and people, who valued me exactly as I was, without ever needing to be convinced. I still keep the small gold crown pin close to me every single day, sometimes in my pocket, sometimes pinned near my heart during important moments. It reminds me that the people who tried hardest to make me feel small were the same people who taught me, without meaning to, exactly how strong I truly was capable of becoming. I was never a used car parked in someone else's garage. I was always, quietly, waiting my entire life to finally come home. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. It truly means the world to us. If this story touched your heart even a little bit, please give it a like. Leave a comment telling us where you are watching from tonight. And if you have not already subscribed, please subscribe now so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. We release new videos regularly, and we would love to have you back with us again very soon.